I've sort of like, I have this reputation as being Trump's whisperer. Trump whisperer on Wall Street. So like, nothing he said really surprised me. But one thing he said, which I think a lot of people didn't pick up on, which is like the most important thing he said. In his speech, he said he wanted to be remembered as a peacemaker. Do you know who was the last US president who talked about wanting to be a peacemaker in his presidential inauguration speech? It was Woodrow Wilson in 1913 on the eve of World War I.
David Woo, CEO of David Woo Unbound. It is great to welcome you back to the show. For folks who are watching and listening, David joined us on Friday morning for an extended conversation on the macro landscape. But I wanted to get him back on just for a brief episode here, just a nice addition to our conversation, because over the weekend, you may have noticed that DeepSeek, this R1 model coming out of this company from China that just really burst onto the scene, is making huge waves in Silicon Valley and Wall Street. And so I just wanted to bring David back on to get his take. David, what is kind of your big picture thought on this model from China, this open source model that was made at just a fraction of the cost from the models that we're seeing here in the US out of, OpenAI? It seems like this could actually be a bit of a macro story. We're seeing stocks, the big tech stocks selling off, Nvidia down over 12%, the NASDAQ down, last I checked, around 3%. What is your take as to what is happening here?
Yeah. I think it's a very good question. And I think from that point of view, like I think DeepSeek, it's not just a company specific story. I mean, because there are a lot of equity traders who just look at individual stocks. This is one of these stories that has massive global macro implications. So from that point of view, I mean, I think the significance goes way beyond what's happening in AI or Nvidia or NASDAQ. It really has fairly profound, I think, implication. And let me see if I can explain myself what I mean by that. I think, first of all, there's no doubt, if you think about this, people have been talking about U.S. economic exceptionalism for the last 2 years. Okay. And I've been saying this for a while, that this economic exceptionalism, evidenced by the outperformance of the U.S. economy, outperformance of the U.S. stock market, the fact that U.S. dollar was trading at a 40-year high, all reflect two very simple, actually major themes, if you like. Okay. One was, of course, foreign policy under Joe Biden, which was literally pushing the world towards the brinks of World War III. And that obviously, created a safe haven basically in the U.S. because the U.S. is far from conflict. And that's one of the reasons why the U.S. market did so well. The U.S. dollar did very well, largely because whether you are U.S. adversaries or U.S., allies alike, okay, the conflicts we've seen escalating around the world the last 3 years have hit you pretty hard. Okay. Now, the other major theme that has propelled this U.S. economic exceptionalism has been, of course, AI. Because 90% of AI until now has been, developed by U.S. companies and adopted by U.S. companies, right? It's actually very interesting because if you look at, for example, the U.S. stock market in terms of its market capitalization as a share of the world stock market capitalization, okay, 2 years ago was roughly around 53%. Okay. Today is now at 63%. I mean, literally it increased by 10 percentage point in the space of just 2 years since OpenAI launched its ChatGPT. Okay. So from that point of view, it's interesting because, you could really make the case that this is the reason why what we're talking about here, why DeepSeek could be a major game changer, not just about AI, but about U.S. economic exceptionalism. Okay. Now think about it this way, right? What this thing really has to do with is the fact that we all know about the tech monopolies in the U.S., right? There are 7 of them, right? I mean, they have massive power. Just think about this. The U.S. economy is less than 20% of world GDP on a purchasing power parity basis. But the U.S. stock market is 65% of world stock market. On top of that, 30% of U.S. market is now tech, like with the Magnificent Seven accounting for 25%. So you can see the general story here that the U.S. tech monopolies, the Microsoft, the Amazon of the world, have become sort of the goose that lays the golden eggs for the U.S. Now, but to understand what that really means, you really have to look at their profitability because, at the end of the day, stock price is a reflection of the earnings of these companies. The reality is, if you look at, these three companies alone, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google's, they control about 65% of the cloud business globally. 65% of cloud computing basically is dominated by these three guys. And this is one of the most lucrative business in the world, like in tech, right? And the reason why it's lucrative and, and that it's a high profit margin business is because guess what? Because it's a capital intensive business. As a result, you need to have very, very deep pocket to play in the sector. This is why, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, even Facebook, they were throwing money like there's no tomorrow, buying Nvidia chips over the last 2 years as though they were like free, because they want to basically put themselves so way ahead of everybody else. They'll be able to maintain a monopoly so that they can continue to enjoy incredibly high gross margin, right? I can tell you I can tell you a major US credit card company, a major one, okay? I had a chat with their chief technology officer not so long ago, and they were telling me 3 years ago, Microsoft showed up at their doorstep and offered to take IT off their hands. That is for Microsoft, for this company to outsource its entire IT department to Microsoft, basically by signing essentially a cloud arrangement, because that means everything has to go into the cloud. Okay. And this company did exactly that. They practically fired 90% of their IT department. And he said to me, you never believe it, David, because Microsoft just came along recently, saying that the contract needs to be renewed 3 years later. And I said, well, so how much do they want? He said, you would not believe it. They asked for a 300% increase.
Wow.
And for this company, it's wow, now it's even too late for them to rebuild. This is a major, this is a household name. Okay. I don't want to basically mention their name only because I don't want to get anybody into trouble. But what I'm telling you is that these monopolies are now literally fleecing American companies, let alone basically companies outside the US. Now, and they're fleecing them because they can. Because they control 65% of this sector, okay, which they believe that AI has only, basically created an even thicker moat. Warren Buffett talks about moat, okay,
right.
Essentially white moat. They think AI has provided this huge moat around their monopolies, and this is why they're able to push up their prices to these incredible levels. So now let's talk about what DeepSeek actually does to this, right? So the idea is that U.S. the assumption in the market until basically Friday, is that U.S. economic exceptionalism is not going to be challenged anytime soon, because U.S. tech monopolies have been empowered by AI. They're going to come to dominate the whole world. And then they're going to have the backing of the U.S. government. Now, we don't know where Trump stands on this because, Biden definitely had a very clear, basically view. He and basically Raimondo, his Commerce Secretary, who only 2 weeks ago, basically introduced this new AI sanction framework. I live in Israel. Even Israel is not in the first tier to the extent that even Israel will no longer, under this basically new framework, purchase AI chips, according to his desire. The U.S. government was going to decide how many AI chips you get to buy because we don't want anybody to have the possibility of challenging the U.S. technological hegemony anytime soon. See, the point here is that the market until now has understood that at a technology level, at a basically money level, at a political level, that the U.S. economic exceptionalism is going to be here to stay for the next 1,000 years. That was what the markets are. And then DeepSeek came along. Now, let's just think about this for a moment, because DeepSeek published the reports of their performance results already last Monday, a week ago, right? That was the whole thing, R1 thing that you had mentioned, that the fact that they finished head to head with OpenAI, that came out already a week ago. In fact, back in December, when they, launched their another basically AI model, it didn't even barely basically even hit the front page news because the mainstream media was not interested. The reason why this piece of news that already became publicly available last Monday only hit the market this morning is because the market didn't know if this company DeepSeek was making up the numbers. Nobody really understands how the process works. Well, you say, okay, fine. So you've got these third-party benchmark that you've outperformed OpenAI on, but what does that mean? Okay. So it was not until the CEO of Microsoft in Davos over the weekend said that he was truly impressed. He said, super impressive. He was referring to the results that all of a sudden market said, well, if Microsoft CEO says so, it must be true. Because honestly, let's just think about this for a moment. You think for a moment, let's just say after those results came out, you don't think like ChatGPT, OpenAI, Google, Gemini didn't all rush to try to, form an independent assessment of the validity of the test results they came up with? Of course they did, because this stuff is readily available, right? I mean, you could actually do this. So the assurance from Microsoft CEOs and others at Davos that this is actually totally kosher, genuine, is what really, scaring the shit out of the market.
Yeah. Well, David, I appreciate you hopping back on here just to fill us in and what it says about U.S. exceptionalism going forward. And as you point out in our conversation, you're bullish on Chinese stocks, bearish on the U.S. dollar. So thank you again for the update. Really appreciate you.
Julia, I just want to say one more thing before we get off, because I want you to incorporate this in this thing, right? This is the most important thing. This is not about whether what DeepSeek did or is real innovation or not. This is not the point. I mean, for all I know, they copied it. Who cares? The point here is that you can sink hundreds of billions of dollars into a technology. If it can be copied easily, then that technology is worth nothing. And that is what Wall Street's trying to reprice today, which is that as much as hundreds of billions of dollars have been poured into American AI, if you cannot monetize it, then it's worth nothing, no matter how great the technology is. And that is the problem that basically Nvidia, Microsoft, Amazon are asking themselves today.
David Woo, CEO of David Woo Unbound, a global forum devoted to the promotion of fact-based debates about markets, politics, and economics, and also the former head of global interest rates, foreign exchange, emerging markets, fixed income strategy, and economics research at Bank of America, and certainly a friend of this show and our most popular guest to date. It is so great to welcome you back to the show, and great to see you as always, David. We always appreciate having you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the show. So.
Well, that means a lot. And this audience loves hearing from you. And we were just chatting before we came online here that the last time you and I had spoken, it was right before the election. You had actually said that Trump was going to win and win meaningfully. You nailed that call again. And I know you nailed the call back in 2016, 2020. So you're always nailing those big election calls right down to like the nitty gritty. But now we are into 2025. Trump has already been inaugurated, first week of the administration now. And so let's kind of start where we always start, because a lot's going to change and will change and has changed. That 2025 big picture, macro view, where are we today? What is the outlook? And as you know, David, you could take all the time you need to set the table.
Sure. Okay. I think, what I would say is this. I mean, obviously markets have been on fire ever since the election. Everybody thinks, well, it's going to be like literally a sort of like a walk in the park for Trump 2.0 because the trifecta, because all these things, right? But I actually think that as much as I'm probably the biggest Trump supporter, and I don't say this lightly. Like, in fact, the last 4 years, I think I was like a persona non grata on Wall Street because I was seen as the biggest Trump supporter, which made me completely untouchable, okay? And all of a sudden, literally, like since the election, like my phone has not stopped ringing. I've been on CNBC every week in the last 6 weeks, believe it or not, okay? So from that point of view, like, because everybody was talking about Trump, however, okay, I'm much more concerned about the challenges that Trump will be facing, because I think it's going to be anything but a walk in the park. And I want to basically put things into perspective for you about what I mean by that, because I think this is very, very important. First of all, as Scott Bessent said, during his testimony, this is his nomination for the Treasury Secretary job, Scott said it rightly. He said that extending the 2017 tax cuts is the biggest single economic issue of 2025, right? And he's referring to the Trump tax cuts that went into effect in 2017, which are set to expire at the end of this year, right? We're talking about the personal income tax piece. Mm-hmm. So if nothing changes, if this is not done, Americans going to wake up on January 1st, 2026, okay, paying higher taxes. Okay. Now, obviously, if this is what happens, okay, the U.S. economy is going to go into recession. I mean, a big time recession in 2026. I mean, this is the reason why Scott Bessent said that this is the biggest economic issue of the day. Now, so therefore, the question you have to ask yourself is how easy it's going to be for Trump to extend his tax cut. I would argue the answer to this question is complex, which I want to basically walk you through it, because I think it sort of involves a lot of things. And I want to basically make sure that I make myself as clear as possible for your viewers.
Yeah, go for it.
Now, first of all, the first statement I would make, which sounds kind of strange, perhaps to some people, is that the biggest winner of the 2024 U.S. elections was the Freedom Caucus. Now, you may not even know what is the Freedom Caucus, but the Freedom Caucus is this group of 31 Republican congressmen and women whom I consider to be the last fiscal hawks in Washington. Right? I mean, these are people who sort of come from, I don't know, Kansas, Texas, largely from the South or the Midwest, who decided to go to Washington for only one reason, which was to stop the debt clock. They see the U.S. federal debt as being evil, right? The biggest challenge facing the U.S. So they think they have basically decided to go to Washington to basically stop profligacy, fiscal profligacy, to save America. Okay. Now, these people, the reason why I said that these people were the biggest winner of the 2024 elections is because as much as Trump won the trifecta, meaning, Republicans won the Senate and the House majority that the Republican currently commands is the most narrow majority in 90 years. In 90 years, not since 1931. Okay. In fact, if you recall, the Republicans won a majority of 5 seats, okay, in November in the House. And then Matt Gaetz resigned because he thought he was going to become, Attorney General. And then Trump pulled 3 people out of the House Republicans to serve in this administration. That means at the moment, the Republicans only have a majority of 1 seat in the House of Representatives. Okay. You cannot get anything done. In other words, at this moment, and I would argue for the rest of this year, or maybe beyond, Trump cannot afford to lose 1 vote of the Freedom Caucus. Okay? That's it. There are 31 people who literally hold Trump by the whatever, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Don't want to use the words. But the point here is, so these people, first of all, it's very, very, now you might say, well, why haven't these people done anything in the last 2 years? Because the Republicans did control the House since the midterm election of 2022. The reason is very simple. Because Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, okay, decided to, shake hands with the Democrats. Okay, instead of shutting down the government or not raising the debt ceiling as demanded by the Freedom Caucus. This is why the greatest irony of the Republican, I think the biggest black mark, I think for the Republican Party, for the House Republicans, for Mike Johnson in particular, is that they enable the Republicans that had the majority in the House of Representatives enable the massive fiscal spending over the last 2 years under Biden, in a quest to basically win the 2024 elections. I mean, that's the greatest irony, but be that as it may, that's over. That's history. The reality right now is the Freedom Caucus, they literally, the Republican Party cannot move right now without having the entire Freedom Caucus on board. Now, you might say, well, these just basically 31 people, do we really care? Forget about the fact that they are really crucial because every vote counts when you have such a narrow majority. But my biggest prediction about 2025 is that I think the Freedom Caucus is going to go ahead and form a powerful alliance with no other than Elon Musk.
Aha, Doge.
Yeah. Elon Musk, of course, as you know, is a fiscal hawk. He wants to cut $1 trillion out of federal spending. And guess what? Elon Musk does not have too much political support. Okay. In U.S. Congress, whether Democrats or Republicans think cutting $1 trillion is going to be bad news for the business of American politics. So you could argue the only allies Elon Musk truly has, in U.S. Congress is the Freedom Caucus. Okay. So from that point of view, it's a marriage made in heaven. The richest men and the most powerful, basically, political factions in Washington right now are literally about to basically embrace each other if they haven't done so already. The third person I think is very important to consider in this equation, of course, is Scott Bessent, who is probably going to go on to become the next Treasury Secretary. And let me tell you this, I know a little bit I know Scott, I don't know him very, very well, but he's been a client for many years. And let me tell you this, every conversation I ever had with Scott, okay, was about the deficit, it was too big, the debt was too high, and so on and so forth. I would argue, there's no question in my mind, you may not know this, but Scott Bessent is a fiscal hawk. He may be a closet fiscal hawk because he still needs to get confirmed by Congress, okay? But he's no doubt a fiscal hawk, okay? And to me, the most interesting thing about his nomination by Trump is that why would Trump want to nominate a fiscal hawk, okay, as the Treasury Secretary, unless Trump himself is also a fiscal hawk? In fact, actually, it was very interesting because Scott did an interview, I think, with Bloomberg a couple of months ago, even before the election, in which he said, it's very strange because every conversation we had with Donald Trump is about every time Donald Trump talks to me, all you want to know is what do we need to do? What do we need to do to cut the deficit? What do we need to do to bring down the debt? So what I'm telling you, it's actually very interesting in American politics because the American political system is such that the impulse is always to run up the deficit. The Republicans, all they're ever interested is cutting taxes. And Democrats, all they're ever interested is increasing spending. Mm-hmm. Both parties pay lip service to fiscal responsibility, but neither really essentially delivers. So it really takes an extraordinary combination of circumstances for the U.S. to ever tighten fiscal spending, even by a little bit. And I'm telling you right now, I think this is one of the rare moments in American history, 2025, that we might just see this playing out. Okay? Now, nevertheless, you might say, well, David, this is going to be hard, right? I mean, Elon Musk says he wants to cut $1 trillion out of U.S. federal spending a year. He wants to bring the deficit down from $2 trillion to $1 trillion. How do you do that? Right? Because we know Elon Musk is not an elected official. That means that Doge cannot touch mandatory spending like Social Security, Medicare, and so on and so forth, which means that, the only thing he can touch in theory is discretionary spending. Now, federal discretionary spending is altogether only $1.8 trillion. If you take away defense, what you're left with is about $1 trillion. Do you think Elon Musk is going to be able to cut $1 trillion out of $1 trillion total federal spending? If he does that, we even have to close down the White House and fire Trump. Okay. So basically, that's obviously not possible. In my humble opinion, the only way you can get to that $1 trillion number, you have to go after, I'm sorry to say this, defense spending. Now, the problem with defense spending, I mean, I don't know how many of your viewers are diehard Republicans and so on and so forth. Let me tell you this. I mean, people still ask me, the deep state is gone, and they just Trump basically destroyed them. Guess what? In my humble opinion, what remains of the deep state, which is also the most powerful core of the deep state, is the military-industrial complex. What are you talking about? You're talking about $900 billion that go into defense budget every year, out of which half go towards the defense contractors. You're talking about these 3-star generals, when they retire, they all get parachuted into these defense contractors getting millions of dollars of pay to doing what? Lobbying for defense contracts. You're talking about Mitch McConnell, the former majority leader, having agreed to step down, has now appointed himself as the head of the Senate Defense Budget Committee. Okay. You're talking about the fact, we're just talking about spending cuts right now. Just last week, the head of the Senate Armed Services Committee, who's a Republican, of course, okay, he just rolled out this new plan to increase defense spending by 50%, by $500 billion practically. Now, so I'm telling you, there's going to be a massive battle between the fiscal hawks, okay, that want to go after defense spending, okay, because they realize that is really where the overspending is happening because of the massive cost overruns of big U.S. contracts, and the military industrial complex that is the most powerful, basically killing machine in America. Okay. So basically, why do you think Trump didn't go anywhere? After the election, he stayed put in Mar-a-Lago, practically he didn't go anywhere. He only played golf, I think, in Mar-a-Lago. Okay. Why do you think Elon Musk has stopped taking pot shots at the defense industry over the last month? Because you're dealing with killers here. You have to understand. These killers who consider themselves to be the greatest patriots of America. Okay. Who want to keep these wars going for as long as possible. Who want us to go to World War III. Because that will be a gold mine. Okay. Now, this is the reason why. Trump cannot afford to take these guys on, head on, right? So what is Trump? So why do you think Trump, is so committed to ending, okay, the war in Ukraine? Do you know, that's actually very interesting. The only thing, I listened to Trump's inauguration speech, as you know, I've sort of, I have this reputation as being Trump whisperer on Wall Street. So nothing he said really surprised me. But one thing he said, which I think a lot of people didn't pick up on, which is the most important thing he said he wanted to be remembered. Okay. This is a man who was in his late 70s. He's thinking about his legacy. Mm-hmm. In his speech, he said he wanted to be remembered as a peacemaker. Do you know who was the last U.S. president who talked about wanting to be a peacemaker in his presidential inauguration speech?
I couldn't tell you, to be honest.
It was Woodrow Wilson in 1913.
So pre-World War I.
Yeah, on the eve of World War I.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me tell you, this is why Trump understands. This is a situation we're in right now, right? Basically, we are because again, the military industrial complex is pushing us in that direction, and Trump wants to stop that partly because he wants to extend his tax cuts. That's his number one concern, and he will have to he certainly cannot allow defense spending to go up if he has any chance of ensuring the U.S. economy doesn't go into a recession next year. And the reason why he's so adamant that we need to stop the war in Ukraine ASAP is because he knows as long as the Ukraine war is going on, he will never be able to stop defense spending. Because the Ukraine war has been this gravy train for the U.S. defense industry. You think they're going to give it up? No. So therefore, for Trump, world peace, in this case, stopping the war in Ukraine, I would argue, is not just a foreign policy objective. In fact, it's central to his economic agenda.
Okay. Yeah. No, this is fascinating. So question for you. Can he achieve all three of those? And when I think, so extend the tax cuts. Because honestly, I don't want my taxes to go up. I don't know anyone who likes higher taxes. Going after the defense spending, if I had to think someone who might understand some of this stuff, maybe it is someone like Elon Musk who could, I don't know, put some, shed some light on where exactly is all the money going and what are the contracts, what's really necessary, what's not necessary. And then can Trump kind of, as you point out, we're on the brink of World War III. Can we have peace? Especially, I'm asking you too, as someone who's in Israel right now as well. So I imagine you have a very interesting perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt. Elon Musk. Elon Musk understands the defense industry because SpaceX, their biggest customer, is Pentagon.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay? So Elon Musk knows everything about the whole, essentially bidding process for government contracts. And what Elon Musk says, which, doesn't take a genius to figure out, is that the current process doesn't work because of cost overrun. For a lot of these projects, in fact, most US military projects, okay, you're talking about not like a 20% cost overrun. You're talking about 300 to 400% cost overrun. You're talking about, let's say, for example, Elon Musk has been a big critic of the whole F-35 program. Okay. Because you know what? F-35, is one of these airplanes, that was designed to do everything very well. Guess what? And ends up not doing anything very well. Okay. And yeah, it's a stealth aircraft, but it cannot even do dogfights. And at any given point in time, it's like 50% of the F-35 are actually under maintenance because these are very high maintenance planes. And Elon Musk saying like, well, why do we even spending hundreds of billion dollars into F-35s when the next wars are going to be fought by drones and hypersonic missiles? Like rather than by like a pilot behind a goddamn plane trying to basically do dogfight in the air. This is the most important thing. So Elon Musk, I think he gets it. And it's very important that Trump has someone like Elon Musk around him who really understands and who's able to tell him the truth. Now, it doesn't mean that Elon Musk can stop the war in Ukraine because I can tell you one thing, because as far as I'm concerned, the Trump presidency really started the day after the election. Because Trump wasn't like waiting for the inauguration. It was not like he went on a holiday for the last 2 months. The guy has been busy working the last 2 months because he wanted to be like ready to go off the gate, like right out of the gate. Okay. Let me tell you this. The Trump team has been engaging, in conversations with a lot of very important world leaders and trying to resolve conflicts before he even becomes president. Because just think about this, right? It's much easier to have these conversations before your presidency begins than afterwards. Because before your presidency begins, like these are casual conversations. That the New York Times is not going to blast you over it and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of things you can talk about. Now, let me tell you this. The conversation between the Trump team and the Russians has not gone as well as hoped. It is very clear. Now, I'm not telling you because I have any inside information, but if you read between the lines, it's very obvious. This is what's going on. Okay. Trump just last week revised his timeline for ending the war in Ukraine from 24 hours to now maybe 6 months or maybe even longer. Okay. Now, why did the conversation not go so well? This is notwithstanding the fact that Putin is sounding very enthusiastic about meeting Trump. He wants to talk to Trump. But what is it about basically the conversation over the last 2 months that it hasn't gone as well as planned? Well, let me tell you something. Again, this is very important. Because as you probably know, Trump has floated this, peace proposal. And one element of this peace proposal, was seen by the Russian as like a red line. It's like the Russians, as much as they like Trump, they said, thank you, but no thank you. This we cannot accept. Now you said, well, which part of that proposal? Okay. You might have read about this, but the U.S., Trump says, you know what, let the Russians keep the territory they already, basically are already under Russian control. Okay. But within Ukraine, what he wants to do is to create a buffer zone that will be patrolled by British and French troops. Now, for the Russians, that's like, no, sorry. And the reason is very simple. Because for the Russians, having NATO troops on its border, even inside a neutral zone, is no different in practice than having Ukraine inside NATO. Russia fought this war, invaded Ukraine in order to stop Ukraine from joining NATO. You think Putin, after having, lost the lives of 100,000 young men, are going to say, yeah, let's bring on the basically NATO troops and put them on our border? Okay. So I think, again, this is not about whether you like Putin, whether you don't like Putin. We are all capable of putting ourselves in the brain of somebody else, even someone we don't like. It's just as though we can figure out, because my job is to figure out for my clients, what's going to be the next move? What's Trump's next move? What's Putin's next move? And how do you invest your money accordingly? And what I'm telling you is that it is obvious that this is something that the Russians will never accept. I mean, no matter how much they like Trump, they can't accept this, especially given there is huge and profound mistrust in the United States and in NATO. Well, and in some of that distrust is completely understandable. Let me just give you one example, okay? So, in 2022, Angela Merkel, the former chancellor of Germany, okay, admitted in a public interview that Germany and France signed the Minsk agreement in 2014 with Russia over Ukraine only to buy time for Ukraine to build up its armed forces and its military strength. That they never intended to honor that agreement. So this is not the Russians saying this. This is the former German chancellor saying this about why she signed the Minsk agreement. Okay. You think the Russians, after what happened in the last 10 years, would trust NATO and the Americans and the Europeans and so on and so forth? I mean, again, if you send 100,000 people to die in the battlefield, you have to be able to tell the mothers, the fathers of these young men, like, you know what, they did it for something. And you're not thinking, oh, wow, I can trust Trump. So, like, let's just basically go with what he says. Okay, we'll buy peace for the next 4 years. Because if you're the Russians, it's a civilization been gone for 1,500 years. They're thinking they're not thinking the next 4 years. They're thinking about the next 10, maybe 20 years. Now, so from that point of view, this is a problem, which is that the Russians, especially given that the Russians right now have the upper hand in the battlefield over Ukraine, and they see no reason why they need to end the war anyway right away, because, their bargaining power, the way they see, is only going to go up, as basically spring and summer arrives, which will accelerate their advance, because right now, half of Ukraine is buried under snow right now. Okay. But the point here is this. It's actually interesting. So what I'm telling you is that the Ukraine war is very likely to be decided it will be decided in the battlefield rather than by diplomacy. The only question in my mind right now, which is the biggest question which should be the biggest question on your mind, if you care about markets, or you care about world politics and so on and so forth, it doesn't really matter. Is will Trump decide to sit back and just let the war play out? Or will Trump decide, basically come under pressure to try to delay the inevitable? Like yesterday, for example, Trump said, oh, wow, I'm going to hit Russia with new sanctions, tariff. I'm telling you. Now, I don't know why he said what he said. Okay. Well, I have no idea. Does he really mean it? Okay. Because if he means it, then this whole situation is very bad. Because all the tariffs, because Biden has already slapped every possible tariff and sanction on Russia and it didn't work. If Trump were to go down that same path, and Trump wants to do everything bigger and bigger and bigger, and he cannot take failure for an answer, like we're talking about World War III. Yeah. Or is it possible that Trump said what he said to placate, to buy some time with the military-industrial complex, so as to make sure that his boy, Pete Hegseth, basically sails through the confirmation, which could be actually today or tomorrow. Okay. So we don't know what's going on here, but what I'm saying to you is that, Trump, I have no doubt that Trump wants to bring back world peace. And then because he's the first president since Jimmy Carter who did not enter U.S. troops into new basic foreign conflicts. So Trump has a track record that, that he could brag about. Okay. And that gives him a lot of credibility in my eyes. But I think that, so much blood has already been spilled that right now is sort of I think on the Ukraine situation, I think it's an impossible situation right now. And this, ironically, Julia, opens an opportunity for the U.S. and China to work out the differences. Because Trump knows, I've been thinking for the last 6 weeks, I've been like debating myself. So who is Trump going to meet first? Is it going to be Xi Jinping or is it going to be basically Putin? At this point, it's very clear it's going to be Xi Jinping.
Interesting.
Because the only person in the whole entire world who's got some leverage over Putin is basically Xi Jinping. The only country that has any kind of leverage over Russia is China, right? Just like Ukraine wants security guarantee from the United States to accept a peace deal. Russia also wants security guarantee, except the US cannot obviously offer security guarantee to Russia. The only country that can is China.
China. Okay, so then what are the chess moves?
That's it. That's why the US and China will have to co-sponsor the peace agreement, which whenever that's going to come. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason why Trump needs to do a deal on TikTok. And this is why he wants to do a deal on TikTok. Not only is because it's a relatively straightforward deal, but because he needs to get back to the negotiation table with the Chinese to get the conversation going again. Okay. So that because, and it's not, this is why you got to think you're dealing with Trump, who is not only a chess player, but he's very good at playing multi-dimensional chess.
Yeah. We're playing like 3D chess here.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And there is no question that this time around, he is so much more prepared. It's like, he has not made, let's put it this way. The last 2 months, he had many opportunities to say stupid things, that kind of thing. He has not said one stupid thing. Like, it tells me that he's absolutely, he's got his eye on the ball. He knows. He's got he's thinking 2 steps ahead, 3 steps ahead, 5 steps ahead. He's got the whole plan A, plan B, plan C. So I would say right now, I'm feeling quite good. But again, nevertheless, what I just told you is not going to be that straightforward. Mm-hmm. The only straightforward part about his agenda is going to be about border security. That is going to be done. And this is also the reason why of all the major currencies to own, I'm so incredibly bullish on the Mexican peso, because Mexico is going to be Trump's best friend. And I'll tell you that if you're interested, and this is why I think I'm very bullish on Mexico, by the way. Okay. Whereas in contrast, I'm extremely bearish on Canada, by the way. Okay. But in general, we have to think about the way you got to think about, how to make money if you want to, if that's your thing. Okay. And that's why you're following your show is especially if you're a currency trader, investor, you're thinking about which countries are going to be winners and losers. The way you got to think about this is which countries are going to get the best deals out of Trump.
Yeah.
Now, to the extent that right now everybody is there's a huge line outside White House of foreign leaders who are trying to get in to shake hands with Trump and sign a deal. Yeah, because everybody knows whoever is going to be the last one is going to get the most rotten deal. So everybody's trying to get to the front of the line. And let me tell you this. Mexico right now is in front of everybody else, way ahead. And we'll talk about that in a second.
I want to come back to Mexico, but can I first go back to China real quick?
Yes, please.
Okay,
yeah,
because you mentioned he needs to get the TikTok deal. That's kind of interesting from a geopolitical perspective. But also when I think of China, tariffs as well. But if China could be super important in achieving peace between Russia and Ukraine, can you kind of walk us through what are the chess moves there? Because that's interesting. And then I do want to come back to Mexico and Canada because that is interesting too.
Sure. I think, listen, it's actually very funny because, as you know, I've got my own YouTube channel. It's whenever I put out a new video, I'm either accused as being, essentially working on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party, or that people call me America's dog or something like that. It's actually very interesting. People see me as either being too pro-American or pro-China. The truth is I'm neither. Okay. I was born in Pittsburgh. I grew up in Taiwan. My parents ran away from the Communist Revolution in China. Okay. They were born in Shanghai. I was educated for the most part in the US. Half of my working career was in Europe. Mm-hmm. I got to the top. I was the most successful Asian guy at Bank of America, probably ever.
Yeah, top economist.
I now live in Israel, and I'm not even Jewish. So, my background, I think, you should not suspect of my ideological coloring because I have none. The only country I'm very patriotic about right now is Israel because I've got 5 grandchildren here living in Israel. So Israel is very important to me. But Everybody else sort of is about the same, I would say. But what I'm much more interested is, is which country is smart and which country is stupid. Right? Because like I'm, as I said there, I'm a professor here in Israel. Like I teach on the side, and then I teach game theory.
Oh, there you go. Okay. That's interesting.
I love game theory because in game theory, there's no Mother Teresa, there's no Adolf Hitler. Mm-hmm. There are only good players and bad players. Okay? And just happens to be the case that Trump is a very good player. Okay? And so from that point, it's just like Biden was a terrible player. Okay. And I think Xi Jinping is not a very good player either. I think Putin, however, is at the same level as Trump as a chess player. Okay. So again, that's the way I see the world, which is like there are chess players and there are checker players. And then what interests me is how do they play against each other? And what are the consequences for the world? And what are the consequences for financial markets? Because you know, this is what I do for a living. Now, let's think about Trump for a moment. Okay. It's interesting that I said before, like Trump's emphasis on world peace makes him the first since Woodrow Wilson. Okay. Now, Woodrow Wilson, in case, people who follow your show don't know, Woodrow Wilson was literally like the father of American idealism in foreign policy. Right? I mean, Woodrow Wilson was the guy who wanted to create the League of Nations, if you recall. Like he was, and when I'm talking about idealism in American policy, what I really mean is this idea it's elevating democracy, liberty, and human rights to to put it up above everything else. Okay. By the way, Thomas Jefferson doesn't look at it that way. George Washington did not look at it that way. But yet it's interesting because 4 years ago, when you listened to the Senate testimony, okay, for his confirmation, Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State under Biden, he spent a lot of time talking about promoting democracy abroad as a major foreign policy goal, which he went on talking about for the last 4 years. Okay. Now, if you listen to what Marco Rubio said last week, it was actually very interesting because Marco Rubio views China as a dangerous rivalry. That's what he said. But he did not frame the rivalry in ideological terms. He can't give a damn about China being an authoritarian state. That is. Okay. So from that point of view, this is very important because Trump does not view the world through the lens of democracies versus authoritarianism, good versus evil. Okay. That's a very big difference between Trump and most of the presidents, 90% of the presidents since Woodrow Wilson, with the exception of Richard Nixon. But Richard Nixon, of course, who was the first realist in U.S. foreign policy since God knows when, he was the one who was the first guy to go to China, actually, U.S. president, who broke the ice with the Chinese. Now, Trump is a realist. What sets Trump apart is like he's not an idealist, he's a realist. And moreover, Trump is interested, and he's only interested in one thing, which is doing a deal. Now, I'm not saying that, you can do a deal out of everything. Clearly, there are a lot of things that cannot, that's beyond even Trump in terms of reaching a deal with the Chinese. Because there's no doubt the U.S. and China are going to remain strategic rival for the next 50 years. There's no doubt about that. But within that, basically, okay, framework, I mean, there's still a lot of things you can do that are on the table that will represent win-win for both sides. Okay. What Trump understands is that a deal is better than a no deal, but a deal requires that there is something for both sides. And that's it. So whereas Biden saw the world glass half empty to the extent he saw the world in terms of a one giant zero-sum game, anybody who loses means somebody else will win. Trump sees the world in terms of opportunity of creating win-wins. Now, if you look at TikTok, it's a very good example. I mean, TikTok is a great example, in fact. In fact, TikTok is such an easy problem that it makes like almost everything else Trump is going to do look like a total layup. Because think about this. A lot of Americans don't realize this. So TikTok, as we all know, is owned by ByteDance. ByteDance is a company headquartered in China. However, if you look at the ownership structure of ByteDance, okay, 20% of ByteDance is owned by ByteDance management. Another 20% is owned by ByteDance employees. The other 60%, in other words, majority of ByteDance is owned by BlackRock, Carlyle Group, and General Atlantic. In other words, American investors. So when you close down ByteDance or TikTok, whatever it is, what you're doing is really like destroying American shareholder value as opposed to whatever China. So from that point of view to begin with, I mean, this is a country that's already majority owned by the Americans. That already makes it so much easier. Okay? So now the only question is Trump says, well, 50-50, which I think makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, who's going to be stepping up to play, buying off? Let's say, what's going to end up happening, I think, is that a strategic investor is going to basically buy the shares from the likes of BlackRock, Carlyle Group, and General Atlantic, okay, American shareholders. And who could be that person be? It could be Elon Musk, no doubt about that. Elon Musk would be an obvious solution. Another person is actually interesting enough, Larry Ellison. Because Larry Ellison, you saw, he was in the White House 2 days ago.
Project Stargate,
yeah. Stargate and all that kind. Because Larry Ellison, I'm sure like he doesn't like the fact that he's been left out, by whoever framed basically the Magnificent Seven, right? I mean, you could argue like Oracle is the second largest software company after Microsoft. Everybody's talking about the Magnificent Seven. Oracle gets nothing. And this is why Oracle wants to buy a ticket to get back into the game. And, this is why they want to go into the data center business to take a whack at the gross margin enjoyed by Microsoft. But the point here is this. Oracle already houses, because Oracle is it's a database company. They already have a deal with TikTok to store all the information about TikTok users in the US by Oracle. Okay. So Larry Ellison, to me, is the logical person to be the US shareholder in this. Okay. So it doesn't really matter. But my point here is to say TikTok, actually, relatively speaking, is actually the easiest problem to solve. Okay. So I think, so that's why I think TikTok, I see TikTok as an opportunity. It's literally about confidence building, because right now you need to get a deal going so that people move on to the next thing. And I've always said, I'm a trade economist. I've got a PhD in economics from Columbia University. I did my PhD in international trade, and then I went on to the International Monetary Fund, where I worked for many years. So, to a great extent, you could call me an international trade expert. And let me tell you, the phase one agreement signed between Trump and the Chinese back in 2020 was one of the best trade agreements ever signed between two countries. I'm probably the only one ever been on the show, or probably the only person on Wall Street who's actually read that phase one agreement, 103 pages of it back to back, like 3 times. Okay? And let me tell you this, it was a great deal because it was a win-win for both sides. Okay. Now, it was interesting, and I've been saying this for many months, that Trump, because that was a great deal, and even at the time, Trump says, wow, it was the greatest deal ever. You know how Trump talks. This is why it's very logical for Trump to want to return to the phase one agreement as a starting point of any further negotiations. And interestingly, on Monday, he issued an executive order, in which he's actually ordering an assessment of where things stand vis-a-vis the phase one agreement. What has China done? What hasn't China done? What's been the compliance, and so on and so forth. So I can already tell you what the first thing Trump is going to say to Xi Jinping when they do meet, I'll just say in China. Under the phase one agreement, the Chinese promised the US that they will spend an extra $200 billion on US goods and services in 2020 and 2021, which of course never happened because of COVID. Mm-hmm. I have no doubt, like the first thing Trump is going to say to Xi Jinping is like, Xi, where's my $200 billion? Okay. I mean, joking aside, I actually think this will be a very key part of any agreement, by the way. Okay, because for Trump, and he's absolutely right, money can solve a lot of problems. Okay, so be that as it may, so what I'm telling you is that that's why this U.S.-China thing, I think Trump was right. I mean, it's very, very interesting. And I think, by the way, let me tell you something else. Many of your viewers, I guarantee you they don't know, which is this. So Trump was invited by China, by Xi Jinping, okay, to visit China in 2017. Okay. So this was the first time the only time that Trump went to China was in 2017 as president, of course. I think he's been to China before that. He went to China in 2017 to meet Xi Jinping. And Xi Jinping, threw open the Forbidden Palace, okay, and organized this banquet for Trump that China's never ever done, okay, to receive a visiting head of state. Okay, this was just to give you a sense of how much importance China attached to this particular visit. And believe me, there have been plenty of other American presidents who went to China before. We never got the red carpet treatment the way that Trump got. And I think part of the story was that the Xi Jinping wanted to impress on Trump, China's got, a history of 4,000 years. We're a great people, the history and all that. You know what Trump did? As they were sitting down at the dinner table, Trump said, well, President Xi, I brought a present for you. So Xi says, well, so what's the present? Okay. So Trump had Secret Service roll in this big TV. Okay. And they beamed in Trump's granddaughter, Ivanka's daughter from New York, who's 7 years old.
Mm-hmm. Arabella, okay.
Yeah. And this little girl of 7 spent the next half an hour reciting in perfectly pronounced Chinese, okay, a 2,500-year-old Confucian text from pure memory. And let me tell you this, I saw, I'm sure he was completely shocked. You might, and let me tell you, this went totally, viral in China because of the message from Trump is well, so you want to teach me about China? We already know quite a bit about China. I think that was the message. To the extent that, listen, believe me, Trump's granddaughter didn't get ready for that thing in a space of a week because her grandfather was about to go off to China. Okay? I mean, clearly, what I'm telling you is that Trump is a man of many talents. And he's much more sophisticated than most Americans give him credit for. And he's very deep. And if there's anybody who can basically, try to work something out with the Chinese so that it's a win-win for everybody, I think it's going to be Trump, especially with the help of Elon Musk, because Elon Musk's biggest factory in the world, car factory, is in China. His biggest battery factory in the world, he's now building in China. Nobody stands to lose more than Elon Musk if US and China were to go. So there you have it.
Interesting. Okay. Let's say that he's able to work out some sort of deal. What would that mean from an investing perspective? Would that create opportunities to invest in China from your point of view?
I'm right now long Chinese stocks. Okay. I've started buying some Chinese stocks last week. I mean, I only started. Okay. I think Friday. Friday was last Friday. So it was a week ago, Friday, whatever, the day before Trump's inauguration. I thought because everybody was saying, Trump is going to impose massive tariff on China on his first day. I said, no way. So I got ahead of that and I bought some Chinese equities. Of course, I've been right. Okay. Yeah. So I like Chinese equities, but again, this is for me, it's a trade, as whatever, who knows what's going to happen. But for the time being, it seems to me that, the US stock market is pretty expensive. The Chinese stock market, in contrast, is pretty cheap. So I like owning some Chinese stocks here, on the assumption that, the relationship will be improved. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, I don't think it's going to go up in a straight line. I told you already, the Trump presidency 2.0 is going to be, it's littered with difficulties, by the way. Okay. But nevertheless, I kind of feel like it's, I think it's, especially if you're long gold. If your long goal is because you think that World War III is going to break out, okay? So if you don't think World War III is going to break out, then you probably can do worse. They're owning some Chinese stocks. FXI, which is the ETF, which is Chinese stocks, large cap Chinese stocks traded in Hong Kong. I mean, that's the ETF. That's traded in the US. I kind of like that, at least as a small part of my portfolio.
Do you want to own gold as like a hedge in case we are on that brink or something goes awry and we don't see world peace? Are you someone?
I mean, certainly it's possible. Listen, I mean, I think for me, gold is I'm trading in and out of gold. Mm-hmm. I'm not like I'm not a buy to hold gold guy. Okay, because I want to believe if Trump succeeds, the geopolitical risk premium is too high. So I mean, in some sense, my investment also is colored by my bias. My bias is that I'm hoping that Trump will be successful in terms of, saying should bring peace back to the world. But there's no doubt, if things don't work out with the Russians, if the deep state, as I said before, if the military, what I'm worried about, the most bullish thing for gold is the U.S. military industrial complex. These people won World War III. And they're going to do everything to stop Trump and Elon Musk. They want forever wars everywhere in the world. And those are the people that I would say, if you want to buy gold, that's the reason why you're buying gold for. No other reason, in my humble opinion, right now.
Yeah. Okay. I want to kind of come back to this part of the world, like US, because you mentioned our neighbors. You are bearish on Canada, but you're bullish on Mexico, specifically the Mexican peso. Can you frame up your thesis there? I imagine this has to do with borders as well. There's some political changes happening, like Trudeau's out. So let's just kind of frame up this, right. Kind of North American, right. If you will.
I think, as I said before, right now, the winners and losers of Trump 2.0 is going to be who's going to get to the line in terms of signing the first deal with Trump. Countries are going to be proactive. They're going to do well. Countries that are reactive are going to do poorly. Now, if I look at Mexico versus Canada, they're like the opposite end of the extreme right now. Let me tell you, 2 days after Trump won the election, he did a call with Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico. 2 days after that conversation, Mexico swooped down and seized a ton of fentanyl, which is equivalent to about 200 million pills, which is a record seizure, anywhere in the world. Over the last 6 weeks, Mexico has arrested more than 6,000 drug dealers because they know that Trump was going to go ahead and label Mexican drug cartels as terrorist organizations. Over the last 4 weeks, Mexico has been cracking down on counterfeit Chinese goods in Mexico on their way to the US. All the fake Gucci bags or fake Rolex watches that you find on, Canal Street that enter the US from Mexico that ultimately come from China. Mexico is cracking down in a big way. In fact, they're revamping their entire custom system to bring it in compliance with USMCA. On top of that, you know what? Claudia Sheinbaum said something last week that I almost fell off the chair when I heard it. This means that the Mexicans really smart. By the way, Claudia Sheinbaum is probably the only head of state today anywhere in the world who's got actually a PhD. This is a very, very smart woman. She said that Mexico is willing to consider the possibility of taking in non-Mexican deportees from the U.S. When I heard that, I was like, wow, this woman is too smart. Because you know what? What a lot of Americans don't realize is that of the 12 million, 15 million, however many illegal, people who entered the U.S. under Biden, less than 20% of them are from Mexico. 80% of them are from Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, Guatemala, wherever they come from. They're not from Mexico. Now, Trump wants to deport 1 million people. Do you really think that the president of Venezuela, Maduro, is going to say, Trump, I love you, send them back, especially the hardcore criminals, send them back, all back? You think Panama is going to say, well, Trump, listen, we'll give you the canal and send back all the criminals back to Panama. We'll take them back there gladly. Of course not.
No.
The fact that the Mexicans are willing to take in non-Mexican deportees is like, I have to say, it's like Mexico holding 4 aces at a poker game. I mean, literally, it doesn't get much better than that, by the way. Okay. Because literally Trump's border policies at the mercy of Mexico's cooperation. And then the fact that they're even saying that they're willing to consider means that they are flexible enough that they, like Trump, are willing to look at a deal in which there's a price for everything. Okay. So from that point of view, when Trump basically came out and said 3 days ago that he's giving Mexico and Canada until like February 1st to make up their mind before he hit them with tariff, I think Trump mentally is already prepared that nothing's going to happen to Mexico because Mexicans have already made a lot of progress. That's my view. Canada, on the other hand, okay, has done zero, okay, in terms of even meeting Trump, like, forget about halfway, even like 10% of the way. If you recall, following Sheinbaum's call with Trump, Trudeau flew down to Mar-a-Lago to bend his knee. But the most important thing, the next day, Trudeau's deputy prime minister, Chrystia Freeland, resigned in protest. I'm telling you, if there's a tough woman, that is this Chrystia Freeland woman. She was like a nightmare, okay, during the, renegotiation of USMCA back in 2018. She was an obstructionist, okay? She hates Trump, by the way. Totally hates Trump. Not that surprising, okay? She's Canadian and she's a woman and she's progressive, right? So the point here is that now that Trudeau has resigned, there's now a leadership race to replace him. Obvious, at this point, it looks like it's Mark Carney versus Chrystia Freeland. And Chrystia Freeland is campaigning on, let's stick it to Trump. Okay? If he hits us with tariff, we're going to basically hit him back with more tariffs. Okay. What I'm telling you is that this is very unhelpful. So while, two women, both dealing with Trump, the Mexican woman is like moving at the speed of light to try to meet Trump like more than halfway and trying to get a deal done. The Canadian woman is like literally about, is literally talking very belligerently and wants to basically fight him to death. So this is why, the situation doesn't look good for Canada, at least in the time being. Now, whether Freeland is going to win the leadership race, I don't know. But all I know is that the general elections in Canada will not be held until October at the earliest. I think once that election is held, I'll be much more relaxed because the Conservatives right now look like they are, they're set to win by a landslide. And then the Conservatives in Canada, they think like Trump. So I don't think there's going to be a problem there. Okay. But right now, the problem is the February 1st deadline that Trump has set. And while I attach a very low probability that Mexico is going to be hit with a tariff, I attach a very high probability that Canada will not be able to escape this. And therefore, at least for the next 8 days, I like buying the Mexican peso versus Canadian dollar.
Okay, got it. Well, I know we're at time here, and I'm gonna have to get you back on at sooner than later if you're open to it, because we love having you on. Because we didn't really go too deep into Europe or anything, but I know we'll have the election in Germany, and I think that's February 23rd. So maybe in a month we'll have to get you back on to kind of reassess that part of the world too. But I've really enjoyed this conversation. You mentioned like Chinese stocks, the Mexican peso. You briefly mentioned markets here in the U.S. Overvalued. What's kind of your take on just more of the U.S. market situation for folks watching?
Believe it or not, I actually like owning 5-year treasuries. I actually think the 5-year treasury is going to be a decent trade. Now, of course, there is a sort of a lever way to play this, and there's an unlevered way of playing this. Like, well, right now, 5-year treasury is trading at whatever, 4.5%. I can see it going down to 4%. Now, if you're a hedge fund guy, you could basically put on a very big lever position. You can make billions of dollars if I happen to be right. If you are a retail guy sitting at home, you can probably do one of these 2 times something. But what I'm telling you is that bonds are very cheap right now relative to stocks. I'm talking about U.S. government bonds. U.S. government bonds right now has never been cheaper in a very long time. And U.S. stocks have never been more expensive in a very long time. So I think if you're long stocks, then you definitely want to buy some more bonds, because if stocks were to have a pullback, bonds will do very well. Because right now the market is basically betting that Trump is going to go after China with tariff, that Trump is going to blow up the deficit. That's why bond yields are so high. And I think if I'm right about Trump, which is that you're going to see fiscal tightening, as a result, you're not going to see too much tariffs. That's actually very bullish for U.S. government bonds.
Why the 5-year?
Why the 5-year? The reason is very simple because, as you probably know, Janet Yellen, Joe Biden's Treasury Secretary, over the last year especially, issue a lot of Treasury bills, to finance the massive U.S. budget deficit, in order to contain the interest cost. As a result, Scott Bessent is inheriting a very, very unfriendly, refinancing schedule. I mean, this year, the U.S. looks like we'll have to issue and roll over about altogether $3 trillion worth of issuance. I mean, which is a pretty scary number if you think about it. You have to find that many people to buy $3 trillion of U.S. bonds, especially if it's going to be any maturity. So from that point of view, the danger of owning anything higher is that, if Trump makes a misstep, you could see a blow up in the bond market, by the way. So this is why I don't want to go very far. 5 year is fine because 5 years also a bet on what the Fed is going to do. It's largely a bet on what the Fed is going to do. And I think that if that were to happen, the Fed will be cutting interest rates very aggressively. So all in all, this is the situation. So you got to think nothing is going to be obvious this year. I think in 2025 is going to be much more difficult to make money than 2024. So watch out.
Yeah. Well, again, I'd love to keep bringing you on as often as you'll join us because this is such a fascinating conversation. I could go much longer with you, David. I could listen to you for hours and hours. I want to give you the final few minutes here. Let folks know where they can find you. You have an amazing YouTube channel, by the way, so be sure to plug that, where they can find you, learn more about your work at David Woo Unbound, and anything that you'd like to leave this audience to think about. The floor is all yours.
Sure. I just want to say, my YouTube channel is obviously free, which is great. I'm just trying to promote. I mean, at the end of the day, again, the world today is in serious trouble because, Americans consider China as an enemy and the Chinese consider U.S. increasingly as an enemy. And then we are now on the brink of World War III. And my hope, I'm praying every day that this won't happen because nobody's going to win in World War III. So, from that point of view, my channel, while it's about investing, how to make money, and so on and so forth, I try to look at everything through the lens of money so that people won't accuse me, or at least I won't be seen as being ideologically motivated in any way. So if you want to get the real objective way of looking at the world and making predictions and then maybe hopefully make some money, or at least not to lose any money, check out my channel on YouTube. David Woo Unbound. Okay.
David Woo, CEO of David Woo Unbound. Thank you again for being so generous with your time, all of your knowledge, your wisdom, your ideas. We really appreciate it. And as I said, you're always welcome on this channel anytime. Thanks again, David.
Thank you, Julia, for having me.